All right, guys. Hopefully you're kind of settled in. You listened to and watched that first recording that I uploaded to YouTube on kind of the course introduction and kind of an overview. I went through the syllabus. If you have any questions on any of that stuff, please do um, drop me an email or let me know that you want to talk to me during my office hours, and we'll talk through it if you have any questions about the structure of the course, the assignments, or whatever. But for now, just sit back and listen to this lecture. This is going to be on chapter 1, and I'm just going to fly through these in order this term. I'll go 1 to 14. Just kind of follow the syllabus to kind of make sure that you're listening to or watching as many lectures as you need to be watching. Like I said during the introduction, if you want to move ahead, you can, but just kind of look at those exam dates, right? I don't have it off the top of my head, but that first exam is going to cover chapters 1 through 5. So you have to make sure that, whatever you do, if you get a little bit behind, that's fine, but you have to watch these lectures. You have to watch those first five chapters before that exam. And you also have to read the text as well. So just kind of pace yourselves. If you have any questions on that, let me know. But anyways, without further ado, I'm going to get right into the material. And send me some feedback, if you don't mind, after you've watched this particular lesson. Just send me some feedback, yeah, it was clear, the PowerPoint was clear, A-okay, or if there was something that wasn't clear, send me an email so that I know to kind of fix it going forward. So chapter 1 in the Pavlik and McIntosh text is really about kind of some of the changes that have been taking place in the media sphere, especially as a result of technology in recent years. And if you think about it, throughout history, there have been these technological advancements that have revolutionized the ways people have communicated. So think about way back in the day when the telegraph was invented, right? You think, well, now it seems like the telegraph is this really primitive thing. You're sending messages in Morse code, and it's all complicated. But back then, that's pretty revolutionary, right? Now you can send basically an instant message to someone who's really really far away. Prior to that, you kind of had to you kind of had to go visit them and knock on their door or whatever to talk to them. So if you weren't in the same place as someone, communication was very difficult. Think about the telephone. Now all of a sudden, that's more advanced than the telegraph, obviously, because now you can speak with someone without being in the same physical space as them, right? That was very revolutionary. It's interesting to note that some people, when the telegraph came out, when the telephone came out, they kind of resisted, and they said, we don't need this. But what happens is that over time it just takes over because it makes communication easier, and anything that makes communication easier eventually is going to be adopted by the people in this society, because people want to communicate. They want to communicate with their friends, with their family members, people that are far away from them. They want to communicate for business purposes, political purposes. That's all a big part of this. So anything that makes communication easier will eventually spread. It'll eventually diffuse. That was the word I was trying to think of. It'll eventually diffuse through society, even if it takes a little bit of time. Let's think about some of the implications of new digital technologies. They've really transformed the way we interact with media and one another. And this is a quote from the book. It says, "There is a new world of media symbols, processes, and effects." And what has happened in the era of digital media is that researchers have gone to work, and there are all these new research questions now. So we have all these papers now about the effects of digital technology on people. And I'll tell you what, there are some people, there are some scholars who think that, I mean, I'm kind of skipping ahead now because we're going to talk about this later in the semester, but there are some people, some scholars who think that some of these new technologies, like even smartphones, my iPhone, and some people think that these things are kind of harmful, even though they make a lot of things easier. But there was a professor when I was doing my PhD at the University of Iowa. There was a professor at Iowa State, it's about 3 hours down the road in Ames, Iowa, and he had kind of dedicated his research program to this issue. And his belief back then was that cell phones were, and at that time, really, there were no smartphones. Really, there were Palm Pilots. That's probably before your time. And then you had just regular cell phones where you could go on the internet, you could send text messages and stuff like that. And he said this stuff was damaging us. And what he said specifically was that our interpersonal relationships were being harmed. That it was becoming more difficult for us to maintain strong interpersonal relationships. Because now, instead of going and visiting someone and talking to someone, he said, what do we do instead? We send a text message. And that's not quality communication as far as he's concerned. The other thing that it does, these new phones and all these gadgets, is they distract us. And so now you've seen, you go to a party or you go to a gathering with friends or whatever, and instead of talking to one another, everyone's got their phone out. Everyone's doing this, right? Right? And people aren't even talking to one another. And it drives me crazy. I'm probably guilty of it, frankly, sometimes, but when I'm talking to one of my friends or I'm talking to my wife or whatever, and the person's just on their phone, clearly not paying attention to me, just like, click, 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 and just going through their Facebook or their Twitter feed or whatever, it's kind of annoying. So I kind of see his point, but that's just something to think about as we talk about these new digital technologies. One of the interesting things that they talk about in chapter 1 is the daily me. This is another possible effect of these new digital technologies. What is the daily me? Well, they describe it in the following ways. What they say is that we tend now, in this digital technology era, and especially in the social media era, we tend to self-select a narrow set of interests. And then we interact online only with people who have the same interests as us, right? And so what ends up happening is that we ignore other things in the world. We ignore matters of broader public importance, or we ignore people that don't think like us, or who don't have the same interests as us. So think about this in relation to your Facebook. I'm assuming you all have Facebook. Some students don't, which I think is kind of cool, actually. But I think most of you probably have Facebook pages. And think about your Facebook page. Think about how customized it is now. Think about your Google account, if you have a Gmail account, for instance. I go onto Google now, and it knows exactly what I want. It knows what I like. It knows what kind of news I'm interested in. And so I get news on that stuff. But what happens is I don't get news on other stuff, right? At least not through Google News. In Facebook, I get all these advertisements and messages about things that I'm interested in because Facebook knows. It's kind of creepy, right? But Facebook knows, because of my internet history, it knows what I'm interested in. So one of the things that I thought was kind of creepy was it knows I'm from Minnesota, Facebook does, and it knows that I now live in Alabama. So it sent me this offer, like this t-shirt offer. It said something like Minnesotans in Alabama t-shirts or something like that. So I was like, whoa, that's kind of weird. That's kind of freaky. But that's the kind of thing that we're getting now. And I look at my Facebook, my quote-unquote friends list. It's people that, have similar interests as me. Over time, I'm very interested in Egyptian politics, right? I was living in Egypt for a couple of years. I've written a lot. I kind of had to escape Egypt because there was a military coup there, and the military government there wasn't a big fan of professors and journalists who were writing critically about them, and I had been doing that. And so a lot of the people now that I'm friends with on Facebook that have friended me or who have followed my page or whatever, they're people who think like me or have the same view or similar views as I do. And that, I guess you could say, well, it's kind of good, it's efficient, but it's also kind of bad because a lot of other people, a lot of other ideas are maybe excluded. So that's just something to think about. So let's look at some of the legal, social, and political concerns in this era of new media. Each new technological advancement brings with it a new set of concerns: legal concerns, social concerns, political concerns. Um, the telephone represented the beginning of networked communication. A lot of people, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of people didn't see the point. They're like, why would I need to pick up this? But why do I need to pay this money? And then I have to buy the device, and then I have to pay a phone bill. I can just go talk to the person tomorrow or whatever. I mean, it doesn't. I mean, it's not so urgent that I have to talk to this person right now. And so a lot of people were like, I'm not getting on board with this. Now, eventually, as I said, it diffused, and everybody got a phone, or most people did in modern societies. But initially, there was some resistance there. We see a similar pattern with the internet. There are some people, especially now. I mean, 2015 in the United States, I mean, that's where we're situated. Pretty much everybody in our society has internet access. We have very high internet penetration. Certainly all of us. I mean, I'm a professor and you're students, so every single one of us has internet access. Even if not at home, and we can go to UNA and we can hop on the internet and we have a high-speed internet connection. But there are still people, many people throughout the world who do not have internet access. In Egypt, internet penetration is something like 40%. So that means 60% of the population does not have regular internet access. And even those who do have access, a lot of them don't have high speed access. So what ends up happening, and this is the important point, this is the social concern here with new technologies, is that a digital divide develops whenever there's a new technology that comes out. Some people get the technology and some people don't. And so a gap develops between those people, right? And then another technology comes out. And the people that got the first technology get the second one. And the people that didn't get the first one don't get the second one. So now the gap has grown. And the gap just continues to grow, right? That is called the digital divide. And it really comes down to the technological haves and the technological have-nots. Those who have access to technology and those who don't have access. And a lot of it comes down to money, right? It comes down to, do you have money? I just realized I just did I probably shouldn't do that. That's the I think Johnny Manziel, Mr. What do they call him? Johnny Football. I think he has this copyrighted now. That's his little symbol. I don't know why. I don't understand it, but I guess he's a money maker, or so he perceives. In any case, that's what happens, is that you get this divide. People that have money, they can afford the technology. People that don't have money can't afford the technology. And so the divide first develops and then it grows. And that's a big problem. You look at you think, well, this only maybe is between like the U.S. and third world countries. No, there's a digital divide in our country, in the United States. There are tons of, if you go onto Google, you could pause this right now if you wanted to, and you could go onto Google and you could just do a search for digital divide United States. You will find some remarkable statistics, which I showed to my students in another, not in this class, but in a different class, my 465 class last semester, and they were astounded by some of the numbers. I mean, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but particularly in some cases of rural areas, and then in the bigger issue is with inner cities across this country, kids and other people are getting sort of left behind because they don't have the same kind of access to resources and technological resources that many others do. And so a gap has developed and it has grown, right? You look at some of the numbers, like people, it's like what they do is the scholars, they look at household income. And so they'll look at people, households that have incomes of $60,000 or more compared with households that have incomes of $30,000 or less. and there's this huge gap in terms of access to technology, right? About high-speed internet access, smartphones, and other technologies, computer access, and that's in the United States. That's not. I'm not talking about globally. Obviously, there's a huge gap globally, but even in the United States, there's a gap. So this is just kind of as an aside. They talk about this briefly in the book, but the telephone in Europe became a government-run enterprise, while in the United States it became private. And so there are some really interesting implications there. And it's, if you get time, I mean, I'm not going to test you on this, but it's interesting just to look at some of the differences in terms of telephone usage and access and production, some of the economic factors related to telephones in Europe compared to the United States. Here's just a question that they posed in the book that I thought was interesting. How would you feel if your professor or a potential employer, for instance, visited your page, your Facebook page, or your Twitter feed? Don't worry, I'm not gonna friend you. I have some students who are Facebook friends, but they friend me. I don't friend I think that's kind of might be a little bit freaky. It's kind of weird. I think I would be like, why is my professor friending me? So, but anyways, how would you feel if your professor wandered onto your Facebook page or your Twitter feed? Would you be okay with that, or a future employer? And before you answer, this is just the implication of these new technologies. Be very careful with what you post to the internet. The assumption, I tell all my students this, you just have to assume that people are seeing, that everybody sees this. And so if there's something out there that you don't want to be known by everybody, then just don't put it on social media. That's the safest way. I know that kind of sounds scary, but we know now that governments, they can access this stuff, right? We know that corporations share data about us. And your employer, your future employer, might try to access your page, and if you've made it public, then he or she would be able to do that. And there have been people who have been refused jobs because of stuff that they put on their Facebook page, right? I mean, it's kind of silly, but there are, I remember a story where there was a young person, it was an article that I read, but it was some young person, I don't remember where, somewhere in the U.S., some state in the U.S., and he had gotten through like 2 or 3 rounds of interviews with this employer, and then he didn't get the job. He lost out, and they were honest. They told him, "Look, your Facebook page was kind of freaked us out a little bit." And there have been employers who have been they do interviews with employers about why they hire certain people over others, and employers are very honest. Human resource departments now, this is just one of the things that they do, is they go Google you. They don't just look at your CV, they don't just interview you, but they will Google you, and they'll wander. The first thing that'll come up in Google, probably, unless you're a celebrity, right, the first thing that'll come up is your Facebook page, and they're going to go onto your Facebook page, and unless you've blocked it and made it completely private so that only your friends can see, they'll be able to see pictures. And so you got these kids on Facebook, 19 years old, whatever, these guys in the bar, they're bare-chested, and they're out on the beach or in the bar or whatever, and they're drinking, and they're drunk, and they're going, woohoo, and stuff like that. And it's just like, employers look at that, and they're like, I don't know if I want to hire that guy. He doesn't seem like he's the most responsible dude. Or people, and this is really stupid, but people that, they're like, they'll post pictures of themselves, like, rolling blunts on Facebook. And people do this. You're probably sitting there laughing right now, but that actually happens. There are young people that photograph themselves rolling blunts. That's an illegal activity in most states still, and putting that on Facebook or on Twitter or whatever, or Instagram or whatever. And people see that, and they're like, let me take this other guy, because or this other gal. There are always other people that they could hire, right? So if there's like if there are 2 people who are equal or close, They'll just go with the one that seems safer, that seems more responsible. Media convergence. This is an interesting area, interesting topic of discussion. And if we were in class, we could talk about this, but we're not. That's one of the drawbacks of the online format. But media convergence refers to the combining of multiple media technologies into one, or the merging of print, audio, and video all into one. So think of, I would, if we were in class right now, I'd ask you to think of some examples. So think of some examples of how multiple technologies have been merged into one. Well, one really good example is this guy right here, our cell phones, right? Our smartphones. This is now, I use my phone for, I use it as a phone. I still call people. That's one reason. But I also use it to, as like a computer. I check email and respond to emails on my phone. I really like the compass thing. Think, well, why do I need a compass? It's a long story, but I'm a Muslim and we pray 5 times a day, and we have to pray to us in a certain direction. So if I'm like out in public or whatever, I just bust out my iPhone and then I can figure out what the direction, the direction. And my sense of direction is terrible. Don't tell anybody this, but I have a terrible sense of direction. Like, I could get lost. My friends, when I was growing up, like when I was in high school, they used to tease me. They used to say that I could get lost in my backyard, which is maybe a little bit of an exaggeration, but not much of one. So anyways, I use my cell phone. I use the compass feature. I use the obviously the internet. I'm browsing the internet. Camera. There's all kinds of technologies just on this one device. And so that's a great example. Internet web pages are now another really good example, because now, back in the day, you used to buy the newspaper, right? You'd buy the New York Times, and you're just reading the hard copy of the New York Times. Now, you go on to NewYorkTimes.com, and you see print. That's obviously still there. But you also get audio, and you get video with that. So it's like TV news, radio news, and newspaper all in one. So these are just a couple of examples, but if you think about it, you could probably come up with several other examples of convergence. There's another kind of convergence which is interesting and important, and that's economic convergence. And that has to do with media concentration of ownership. And this is something that we'll be talking about during the course of the term. What happens over time is the big fish kind of swallow up the smaller fish. They buy them out. And so, like in the media industry, you end up with what? You end up just a few people, these large companies, owning pretty much all of the other companies, pretty much owning all of the media companies that exist. There's a guy named Ben Bagdikian, a famous media scholar. This is funny. I should turn my computer around and show you guys this. But as I'm talking about our obsession with the smartphones, I'm in my bed, obviously in my bedroom, and there's a woman outside walking her baby in a stroller, and she has stopped, and she's been there for she's been there for a while now, and she's just doing this. She's on the side of the road, and she's just texting away or doing something on her smartphone. So I think that's kind of interesting. But anyways, where was I? Ben Bagdikian. He's a media scholar, and he wrote a famous book called The Media Monopoly, which was published and then republished in many different editions, and now it's called The New Media Monopoly. But he was complaining in his book about how only a few media companies own pretty much all of the media companies that exist. Whether we're talking about radio, newspaper, magazine, television, movie houses, whatever. They're all owned by just a few people. And the reason why he thinks this is a problem is because the voices have been narrowed. The range of voices has narrowed. So instead of getting a lot of opinions and a lot of views, we only get a few, because there are only a few people that own all of these media outlets. So it's a major issue, for a lot of people, right? just kind of interesting. When he wrote this, he first wrote this book. I think it was 1980. It was 79 or 80, and at that time, he was concerned with how many companies owning most of the media in the Western world. In the United, he was specifically concerned with the United States. How many companies do you think it was? Think if we were in class, I would ask for guesses, and you guys would throw your hands up, and you guys would guess. But so there's really no suspense here. I just have to come on and tell you. It was 50 companies, which is a small number of companies. 50 companies, think about that, owned in 1980 the thousands of newspapers and radio stations and TV networks and magazines and movie houses and book publishing houses. They owned all of that. Just 50 companies. Guess how many it is now? 6 companies own all of, or the majority of, the media industry. They control the media industry. 6 major conglomerates in the Western world own the overwhelming majority of media companies. So that's, and again, some people think it's not an issue. For some people, it is an issue because they say that the voices are fairly limited. We don't get a full range of voices. But to be fair, some of these companies argue that things are more streamlined now, so that if one person owns TV and newspaper and radio, they can kind of streamline their efforts, and so it makes things more efficient for us, for the customer. I mean, that's just another. I want to be fair about it. That's one perspective. But pay attention to this sometimes, because and here's an example of media ownership. Look at this is an example of Time Warner. So Time Warner, this is just a sampling, by the way, of the stuff that they own. Time Warner owns HBO and all of they're like 47 million, that's a slight exaggeration, but there are a lot of different HBO networks. They own all of those. All the Cinemax, TBS, TNT, NBA.com, PGA.com, NCAA.com. They own all this stuff. Cartoon Network, CNN. You might have heard of that small little cable network. So Time Warner owns a lot of stuff. Walt Disney Company is another one. Walt Disney, Disney World, right? They don't just own Disney World. They own a lot of stuff. They own ABC News. They own ESPN. Next time you're on ESPN.com, pay attention. You'll find little news stories that they'll bring from ABC and vice versa, because they're sister companies, right? They share with one another. So this is it's an interesting phenomenon, an arguably dangerous and deleterious, harmful phenomenon, because it creates all these webs of loyalty between these sister corporations, these corporate cousins, and they support one another, and it narrows the range of voices for people like you and me. Cultural convergence. This is another kind of convergence. So we have many different kinds of convergence in the modern era. But you've all heard of globalization, I'm assuming. And globalization is basically it's the world becoming smaller. You've heard the idea of the global village, like we're all kind of connected now. The world isn't so as far, places aren't as far apart anymore, because we can just, we hop on planes and we can be there. We can listen to the news in other places, watch what's going on thousands of miles away on television. We can communicate with people right now. I mean, this is a great example. I mean, we're communicating. I'm in one place and you're in another place. You might, I don't know where some of you are. I know that I've gotten emails from some of you. Some of you are going to be traveling like globally, so you might be somewhere. I forget where people are going, but somewhere in Europe or whatever, and you're watching this lecture. You communicate with friends on Skype or other Facebook or whatever. So we're all kind of connected. So what happens when the globe gets connected? When the world becomes globalized? That's the question, and there's some debate about that. One of the things that people have argued is that it's really great for diversity because now, look, you got the French are sharing with the Germans, and the Americans are sharing with the Chinese, and you've got all this give and take, and so the world becomes just this wonderful melting pot, right? And it's very diverse, right? We share with one another. That's one perspective. Um, Another perspective, though, is that, and these are names for these phenomena here: globalization, homogenization, westernization, American. But another argument is that what's really happening is that the world is becoming the same. The world is becoming homogenized, and specifically, what's happening, if we want to be more specific, what's happening is the world is becoming Americanized. If we want to just kind of cut right to the chase, when I go to Europe, when I've been to the Middle East, I'm just giving you my perspective on this, my personal experience, and I do tend to be as someone who's studied and written a little bit about globalization, I'm kind of a homogenizer, meaning that I do tend to think that the world is becoming, there's a lot of sameness, and the world is kind of becoming Americanized. Not everywhere, not exclusively, and not absolutely, but that's a dominant trend, in my opinion. You don't have to agree with me, but I think that's what's happening. And I don't necessarily think it's the healthiest thing, because I think local cultures kind of tend to get destroyed in all of this. But when I'm walking around Egypt, for instance, I go to the mall. I go to the mall, I go to the food court. What do I see in the food court? Let me just, this is off the top of my head. See Dairy Queen, McDonald's, Baskin Robbins, Burger King, Pizza Hut, Domino's, Papa John's. Got all the standard pizza joints. Kentucky Fried Chicken, of course, that's a staple. They love Kentucky. Kentucky Fried Chicken is super ridiculously popular in Egypt. I don't know why. I mean, it's good. It's cool. I like KFC, but it's like ridiculously popular in Egypt. That's 8 off the top of my head. What else? There's way more than that. I mean, what I want to. I wish I could send you a picture, but like the food courts at the malls there, it's like 90% American. Hardee's, that's another one. Hardee's is big in Egypt too. I don't even know if they have Hardee's here. Yeah, no, they do. They have Hardee's here in Alabama. But Hardee's is kind of taking a hit. They used to have way more restaurants than they do now. I think they just kind of got eaten alive, pardon the pun, by McDonald's and Taco Bell and Burger King and all these other places. But anyways, so I go there and I see all these restaurants. Now, is the reverse true? When an Egyptian person comes to the United States, is he going to see, or she going to see, a bunch of Egyptian restaurants? Like, a shabrawi, which is one of the talmiya, one of the falafel place. You know what falafel is? It's one of the falafel places in Egypt. You probably never heard of it. I'm just going to go out on a limb, right? Unless you've been to Egypt, because that doesn't exist here. There are no Egyptian restaurants in the food courts in the malls in Alabama or Georgia or Florida or anywhere in the United States. So it's not really a give and take in my estimation. There's some give and take at some level in some industries and with some things, but I don't think it's very equal. It's not just food, by the way. It's clothing. You go to the mall, what are people wearing there? There's a Nike store. There's an Apple store in the malls there. American corporations. When people go on the internet's in English, right? Google. I mean, you can get stuff in Arabic, but there are way more English websites than Arabic websites. And at the end of the day, you're going to have to learn English and get on if you really want access to information, the best information, right? So even that is kind of unequal in a sense. Clothing. Entertainment. I'm in Egypt. I'm flipping through the channels. What do I see? According to Jim, Friends, Seinfeld, King of Queens. Flip over to the movie channels. All American movie. Now there are some Egyptian movies, and they have some just Arabic, networks and they show Arabic movies. Obviously, I'm not going to make it like it's all American, but Hollywood movies are absolutely dominant in Egypt, and that's saying something because Egypt has the biggest movie industry in the Middle East and in the Arab world. Right? Egypt has one of the largest movie industries in the world, And yet, when you go to the movies, you'd think, well, it'll just be Egyptian movies. No, it's Egyptian movies. There's a section for Egyptian movies, and there's a section for American movies, for the Hollywood movies. And that's in every theater that I've ever seen in Egypt. And I've been to a lot of theaters there. And the American movies are usually more popular. And they have they have subtitles. So if somebody doesn't speak English, they can just read the Arabic subtitles. So, anyways, cultural convergence. What's happening? You don't have to agree with my perspective. Do some reading. Make your own mind up. Do you think the world's becoming more diverse? That there's a lot of sharing, or do you think that it's kind of homogenizing? That we're becoming the same and largely kind of westernized and specifically Americanized? Couple of points here, big picture points about what technology is doing. One thing that it's doing is it's blurring the line between interpersonal and mass communication, right? Now you ask yourself, is this interpersonal communication? Is this mass communication? Like if I send an email to my friend, okay, that's interpersonal. But if I send an email to like this big listserv, there are these huge listservs, well, those would be like hundreds of people on these listservs. Is that interpersonal or is that mass communication? If I tweet something, if I put a Facebook status up, and just in theory, I mean this rarely happens, but let's just say somebody is like really famous and it gets 10,000 shares on Facebook or something. Is that interpersonal, or is that now it's kind of become that's now a mass message, isn't it? So the lines have become a little bit blurred. 30 years ago, you watching TV, that's mass communication. You're talking to your friend on the phone, that's interpersonal. It was very simple to determine and decipher. Now, it's a little bit more complicated. Another point is that technology is affecting how we consume media. So instead of being passive and silent, we can use technologies rather, to customize our own media usage and even produce our own content. So we are more active. We're not as passive, arguably. Now this is a debatable point, but I don't want to confuse things right now because we'll talk about this more later when we talk about active and passive. But you do have the ability to create content now and put it out there. You can make a video on YouTube, like Facebook, whatever, Twitter, tweet something, and then there have been people who there was I was reading an article a couple of days ago. This girl tweeted something. She's not famous at all, but her tweet just went completely viral and was retweeted, I don't know, tens of thousands of times. It was ridiculous. And they wrote articles about it in the newspaper. So, I mean, you can argue that that's an example of people being more, really the technology making us more active. Excuse me. I think what I'm going to do is this, and I should have mentioned this, but I'm going to try to divide lectures up. So we're still on chapter 1, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it up. The reason I'm going to do that is because it gets really hard to upload huge videos that are like an hour and a half long or whatever. So I've been going now for I think about 38 minutes or so. I'm going to stop here, and then I'm going to pick it up with the next, basically part 2 of chapter 1 at this slide, 8 implications of convergence. Oops.